Hello, Dan.
Good to see you, man.
Good to see you as well. How you doing?
Great so far. Interesting year.
Yeah, that's for sure. Are you talking about 2021?
Yeah, all of them. I keep making the joke that 2021 is like looking at 2020 and saying, "Here, you're gonna hold my beer, watch this. We're gonna make it really interesting."
Texans are all kind of thinking that. Those of us that have beer to drink and a place to keep it.
Yeah, no kidding. Are you still in Galveston?
Yeah, actually, right now I'm in Dallas, but I have a house in Galveston, and I had to patch six leaks, six leaky pipes after they shut Galveston off. They gave Galveston no power from early Monday morning until most of the island came back Thursday night. My end came back between Friday and Sunday. They sacrificed the island. They literally cut the power off to the whole island except the hospital.
Wow. I heard that happened in the Heights here in Houston, but yeah, we didn't have it that bad.
Yeah, up in Dallas. I was in Dallas at the time, and they were rolling the blackouts, 20 minutes off, 40 minutes on. So, it was a little chilly and more worrisome. Are they going to cut it off for real? And I kept looking at my online stuff at the house in Galveston going, not back yet, not back yet. The Facebook page for my little neighborhood kept saying, nope, nope, nope. And it just kept getting worse. So I went back last week on Monday night. I have bottled water, tub full of water kind of thing for flushing the toilet. And plumbers came out to cap everything on Tuesday. So anyway, Tuesday I got a bunch of stuff capped off outside, one pipe inside fixed. And next week, probably the plumbers will be done enough. There's still people in Galveston that have no water to this day. There's still people trading pieces of pipe. If you have CPVC pipe in Galveston, you can trade it for almost anything. So anyway, how about you?
Well, we lost our power for about 36 hours at one point. Now it's as bad as it got. Then it was just kind of on and off. We did have one pipe that burst, and it's the same thing. Good luck finding material. You can't find anything. And of course, you can't get a plumber to call you.
Right. Well, I had a handyman who I paid before the problem. Bless you, to drain my water, but he couldn't get into the house because I wasn't there to drain the inside pipes. So we just drained everything out. And it turns out the way my pipes going into my house are built. So here's a plastic pipe coming out of the ground, and then there's a metal valve, and then about a foot over the metal valve, it comes into the house, and the drain spigot is above the valve. So he drained the valve,
right?
The relief valve, but the actual valve itself was full of water and exploded. So why didn't they put the hose cock below the valve? And believe me, when we rebuild it with real parts instead of jury rig parts, we're going to put the drain below the valve. Basic engineering, let's put the part that lets the water out below the part that explodes. So that took, a day to get figured out how to mix the parts to get them to kind of almost stick together. And then we could look for the leaks. It's just so annoying. And yet, people in the woodlands, I have friends in the woodlands who experience nothing, because I didn't know the woodlands is not on ERCOT. The woodlands is on a different grid. So I have a friend who lives up there. Turns out he's a survivalist, but he didn't need any of his gear. He had internet, power, water, everything. And then other woodlands people have PEX pipes, which is the more modern stuff. And apparently that can take freezing, unlike copper or PVC or CPVC. So a bunch of people in my neighborhood are repiping their entire house for, $4,000 with PEX.
Jeez.
Anyway, I'm learning a lot about plumbing in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah. That's one of the cool things. Because that pipe that we lost, I got up there and started poking around the attic, and I had the same kind of thoughts I think you're having. I'm looking at this thing, I'm thinking, why aren't there more valves up here? It can't cost that much to put a valve right there. If I could have just turned off a valve, I could have had watered the entire house. What I lost was the hot water feed to my washing machine. And I could have gotten by without that for weeks.
Yep.
Yeah. Dang. But no, I had the entire house was down because of that one little crack in the pipe.
Yep, and the PEX stuff. What they're doing with this PEX, apparently houses built in the last 5 or 10 years, depending on where you live, instead of having pipes that are run like yours and mine, they bring a pipe in somewhere and then run it somewhere else and then come off it wherever the hell they want. The new model is structured piping. This PEX is the blue and the red pipes where you put a manifold in where the water comes in. So here's a manifold, and it's kind of like putting a router. So I got a router in here fed by the outside water, and then there is a hot and cold as appropriate. Here's my cold water, here's my hot water. And so it literally runs room to room, and you can turn any room off or any fixture off from the manifold.
That sounds like a brilliant idea.
Yep. But it costs an extra $300 to put in your average $250,000 home, so they don't want to do it.
Yeah. $300. Yeah, that sounds about right. Sounds about right. Well, let's jump in with this. I'm glad you could take the time, and I'm just glad to see you. I hadn't seen you in forever. And so I'm doing this, as you know, I'm doing this MBA, and I've got this team, and I've got this recording here. So we'll just go through the questions that I had sent and just kind of talk through them about the way you see it. But the class is supply chain management, and the topic is how cloud providers have changed traditional IT supply chain management problems.
So this is about the IT supply chain, about how we provision the IT function.
Yes. And I thought, well, shoot, Wayne could do this falling off a bicycle. So, because, one of the things I think is super interesting is that the historical perspective. At some point, people were, back in the 50s, people were buying computers that they figured they'd use for 20 years, I assume. And now, boy, we have moved way far away from that. And so I was the supply chain management.
Depends on your industry, Dan. When I was in the utilities industry, which I've been in a couple of times, I worked for a generation company many years ago, and their assumption was, and this was the mainframe era. Everything was mainframes back then. My first IT job in the 70s. And they budgeted all of their power plant stuff for 50 years life. So they budgeted their computer equipment for 25 years life. And now I'll tell you the funny story about that, and it's relevant to IT supply chain and history. So here I am in the 1970s at Long Island Lighting Company, and I was an IT consultant, and I would go in and change the programs. And they had a commenting system where you'd make a comment, and this is my initials, this is what I did in the date. Yeah. And so in 1970s, I did this, 79, 80 maybe. And so here I am at MX Energy. I'm at a conference, and I'm talking to somebody about the old days, and he works for the successor to this utility. It's been sold 3 times. And I was telling him my story about having to make it's a union shop, and I was non-union because I was a consultant, so I could change the program. My story was about how I changed the link edit step in the billing system in production. And when they told me they had a problem with the link edit step in the billing system in production, my question was, what do you mean you're changing the billing system in production? The link edit step is where you take all the compiled modules and turn them into a runnable program. This is what you do in tests. You don't do it in production. Oh, no, we do it every night. We make so many changes to the system that we recompile the system every night to run the bills. So think about that for a minute. This is CI/CD, in 1979. Yeah. And so I was joking about how that's how this company ran, and it was all mainframe assembler and a little bit of COBOL. And so here I am in what MX was 2011. So here I am at the Oracle's conference. I tell this gentleman the story, and he calls me about 2 weeks later and says, "Hey, I found your name in the comments of the billing system."
Oh my gosh.
I said, "Wait a minute, billing system from 1980? Yeah.
Still running.
They're still running the billing system on the mainframe, and they found my comment. I was comment number like 250,000 in this program. So anyway, because the billing system was from 1960 something, and here I am in 1980 changing it, and 30 years later, they're still running the system. So when you talk about supply chain in the mainframe, I'll just say this honestly: in the mainframe world, putting in a mainframe and the amount of sunk cost we have in these COBOL programs and mainframe assembler programs in high transaction, high integrity spaces, the SWIFT network, stock, securities trading, financial services as a whole. It's been running 30, 40 years. The FAA in the air traffic control systems still runs a customized program written in a customized operating system built by IBM to run on a customized mainframe for the air traffic control system. It's a specific mainframe designed in the 1960s and early 70s that's still being supported and maintained to keep airplanes in the sky. So when you think about supply chain, the assumption that our assets are ephemeral, very short-lived, is actually, unfortunately, in some cases, incorrect. A well-written, well-maintained, 500 million, billion, multi-billion dollar infrastructure built on equipment that's still being manufactured and maintained, like mainframes, can run for 30, 40, 50 years with obviously some flexibility and technical debt and supportability problems. But if you start with a mainframe system running on IBM's now ZOS, MVS when I did it, there's an inherently high level of security, high level of availability, high level of maintainability. And so the systems are designed to run for years without being restarted. And many of them have. At a couple of the big financial services companies, I have a client that sells a product that builds into MVS for them. And the problem is if they miss the annual reboot, they have to wait a whole year to get their product maintenance, depending on how severe the maintenance, included in the next production update. They reboot the mainframes on purpose once a year at this large financial services company. So that's not the normal, the companies that you tend to work at, I tend to work at. I'm not talking about the 10 biggest banks in America, that kind of thing.
Right.
So just as if you look at a historical perspective, it's a very interesting one.
Well, yeah, I am looking for that actually. So there is that idea that, the cloud doesn't solve everything. And we've talked about that for years. There are people that seem to think that it does. And there are cases where you don't want to be in the cloud. So they opt in or they opt out. And even I would assume even in the cases where you have an on-prem situation, you've got a mainframe running somewhere, like you had mentioned, the cloud is still solving something. The cloud is still helping with aspects of that, but it's not solving maybe the server problem. It's just solving something else, maybe the licensing problem.
Well, depending on what you want to define as the cloud. If the cloud is the place where the servers run that aren't yours versus the network, if you talk about the edge network, right. SDN, and because everything is software defined everything these days. So does the cloud include your SDN hosted through, AT&T or whoever? Right. But the traditional, if you're saying cloud, meaning Google, Microsoft, Oracle, Amazon, Tencent, the traditional hyperscale players, then the question of whether the cloud solves everything is the answer to that is for every rational business case, probably a few national security cases separate, they've got to run their own high security buried in the basement, and you and I'll never see it. So excluding those really edge cases, the cloud solves every problem over time. It's just a question of when. I now, of course, since we went through in Texas, I asked the question prior to 2 weeks ago, how many people do you know that generate their own electricity? How many companies do you know make their own electricity? Just again, by way of historical perspective, when I got out of school, actually, I dropped out of college and became an engineer in Massachusetts, in the Boston area. And the building that I first went to work in was built on a river, and the building itself was very old, and it was on a river because it used to be powered by a water wheel prior to my current employer. And it was powered on a water wheel because they weren't sure if this newfangled electricity stuff in 1920 was going to take off. So in fact, when I got there, and I got there in 1972, So here I am, brand new engineer, kind of don't even have a degree, but I was going to be a double E. And the factory is powered at that moment in 1972 by a drive shaft in the ceiling of this 100,000 plus square foot factory. A drive shaft went the length of the building in the ceiling, 30 feet up. And then there was leather belts connected to pulleys in the drive shaft. They were about that wide. They're called wide leather belts. And you stitched them together with the metal thread and you powered your machines on them. And how did you adjust the speed of your machine? They had a cone pulley. So the pulley was this big at one end and that big at the other end. Right. And when you're a machine operator, the first thing they would do is they would take you out in the back, because we were in a forest, and you'd cut your own forked stick. You'd go out with a hatchet or a saw, you'd cut a forked stick, kind of like this, and you would use it to push your leather belt on the cone pulley to change the ratio between the fixed pulley above and the variable pulley at the bottom.
Wow. Because
the plant used to be powered by a water wheel. Now it was powered by an electric motor. Now, one of my big enhancements was I put individual electric motors on the machinery. So we didn't have to be in the 40-foot long drive belt business and the cutting of trees to run a manufacturing plant. And so I got interested in the history of electrification. And so you may know, some of the time you worked with me, well, you had, the role you had at MX was a role that nobody had ever had before. You were the support person for sales and marketing. We create these positions because they're new and because we have to think through a new way of operating. So there used to be a position called VP of Electricity 100 years ago. And that person's main job was there was this guy named Tesla and this other guy named Edison. One was AC, one was DC. Which one's going to take off? And they were making these the same decisions we make today on, I'm going to run in the cloud, I'm going to run hybrid, I'm going to run hyperconverged. 100 and something years ago, we were making the same decisions on this newfangled stuff called electricity. So when people tell me the cloud's not the answer to everything, I tell them that there was a time when we all wondered, was Tesla going to win or Edison going to win? That's where we are now on cloud. So I'll maintain that other than, again, certain government anomalies where they have to run their own equipment buried in the ground and sunk in concrete, and they just can't trust any outsider, or where the hard real-time requirement is such that the speed of light in a piece of wire this big matters. Right. And that sounds foolish, but remember, I go back old enough with check processing. When you run checks at 3,600 checks a minute through a check sorter, which is the speed banks ran at the time, IBM introduced this check sorter. And the check sorter had to be within 50 yards, 150 feet of the mainframe. Because the electrical signal delay getting from the check sorter to the mainframe and back would, if it was longer than that distance, the checks would go out of control because there was nothing telling them where to fly in this machine. And IBM eventually solved the problem by building a mini computer into each check sorter to handle the pocket. It's called the pocketing decision. Where do you put the check? And then we can do the back end processing in the mainframe. So hard real time matters. It's just a question of how fast is too fast, edge computing. Right. But other than that, Dan, I got to say the problems, cloud will solve all of the rest of the problems. The problem most companies have is the way they account for software development. So if I've got $750 million into my development in some mainframe stack that I've run for 30 years, the right answer is to start moving into the cloud. But where do you find the money? And more importantly, the gumption, the guts, the willingness to bet your company on replatforming. And so I think a lot of the traditional companies will be stuck on mainframes because of the unwillingness of their CEO and their CIO to bet the company on a transformation that they may not live in the business sense to see. Here I am, I'm the CEO, I'm 58 years old. I'm talking about Silicon Valley startups, the legacy, manufacturing companies, things like that. I'm the CIO, I'm in my 50s maybe they're both older than that. So I'm going to come to you and say, I want to do this replatforming of my $1 billion ERP or financial services or whatever system, and I want to move it to the cloud. And it's going to cost us $750 million to rewrite it because we don't remember how it works to begin with. And it'll take 5 years. So here's the pros are we will build a better, stronger company, ready, positioned for the future, lower our ongoing costs, and let Microsoft or Google or somebody else worry about the back end of the system. The downside is if we screw it up, we get written up in the Wall Street Journal, we lose our pensions and probably our options, and we go down in flames, and everybody at the country club makes fun of us. So what would you like to do, boss? And the answer is going to be, I think we'll make that a project for our successors, and they kick the can down the road. There's the supply chain problem in IT. It's the kick the can down the road problem.
I hadn't considered that. Okay, that is fascinating. So kick the can down the road. So the problem, I had talked with somebody else about the idea that the IT leadership skills that you need now are different than they were 10, 15 years ago. And so do you agree with that? And what do you see as the key? And I remember you talking specifically about the importance of the IT generalist. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if that is ascending in your opinion now, as opposed to.
Well, let me answer your question in two parts. What was needed and what was popular are two different answers in many cases. You know me for a number of years. You know me as a CIO. I was much more interested when you knew me 10 years ago in succeeding in the business versus fixing the IT budget. I was willing to go ask for more money to help marketing, right, even though it put me as a budget variance, because my goal was effectiveness of the business, not efficiency of the IT budget. But what's happened is over the last 20 years, a couple of things, or 30 years, a couple of things have happened. Number one, IT's moved from systems of record to systems of engagement to systems of insight. These are definitions that are very handy. They came out of IBM Canada years ago, and now they're commonly used. A system of record is the monthly payroll system, the inventory report, the sales report. When the CEO, remember we just talked about the CEO and the CIO who are risk averse? Well, the CEO and the board members even more have this problem. When they were learning business, when they were 20-something years old, they graduated business school, they're starting on their management ladder. So they're first-line managers, maybe director, and supervisor. What do they learn? They learn how to supervise people. They learn how to sell. They learned accounting. They learned, we didn't call it human resources then, we called it payroll and personnel. They learned data processing. They didn't learn IT. We didn't have IT. They learned data processing. And in the 1980s, what was data processing? It was a guy like me wearing a white coat with my name stenciled on it, pushing a cart on which was green bar paper. Here's your sales report monthly. Here's your inventory report monthly. Here's your production report monthly. And that's what they learned about IT. And then as they moved up the ladder, sales didn't change all that much. Accounting didn't change all that much, right? Manufacturing, unless you were the guy building the stuff, didn't change that much. We get it in, we ship it out, we warehouse it, we do that. But the computer that used to be green bar paper became this thing. And the network turned inside out. And instead of worrying about monthly reports, what do we want to know? We want to know what the experience of the person at the other end of that screen is every minute in our product. Whether it's a self-driving car or a bulldozer that figures out the angle not to fall off the cliff, or the warehouse that adjusts itself. And now all these experts in business have seen IT transform at a rate 10 times, 100 times as fast as the others. And they haven't kept up because they haven't had to keep up. And then when they wake up and they've ascended to the top level and they have to know this stuff, and we told them it's very important, they're lost. So if you're thinking about it, systems of record are pretty easy. We account for stuff, we write a report periodically. Systems of engagement are much more dynamic and much more in the face of the customer. And then we're moved from systems of engagement. The question is, what do we do with that data? With systems of insight. How do we turn data into information and information into insight? And that says to the manager, you've got to think of the questions you want to ask and then build the information gathering into the product so that we can fill the pipeline, generate the information, and then come up with the insight. The reason I know this is a long answer, but 20 years ago, when we cared about and management cared about systems of record, IT's job was to make the trains run on time. IT should be efficient. IT should be predictable. IT should have a low error rate. And that was all we needed from IT. The business would tell us IT could be an order taker, or IT could just keep everything running, because what I made, how I sold, my interaction with the customer in the store or the contact center, even if it was telephone, was less minute by minute, second by second engaged into that IT infrastructure. So I believe as a CIO, some of us figured out even years ago that we're in the product enhancement business, that we're in the business of helping the business deliver their goods better. But it was less important. And if IT reports to, and I some of my best friends are CFOs, but I'll say it, if IT reports to the CFO tends to see everything as an ROI, cost minimization, value maximization exercise. So we wind up with an IT budget that works like this. Here's your IT budget. It's X% of sales, 2.2% of sales. That's your IT budget. And so the effort involved in that is the political gamesmanship of telling people no nicely. No, that project doesn't fit within the IT budget because they gave it to me this way. Well, no, that doesn't fit within the IT. Oh, you're going to be project number 27 on the list, So it's Dan, I tell people the only place everything goes into the IT backlog is in two places. Either it goes at the top or it goes at the bottom. Nobody ever comes to you as the CIO and says, please make this priority 28. I need it now, or at a particular time, I got a customer, I got a regulatory requirement, a year end, whatever, or do it when you get around to it. So then it all becomes 10 pounds in a 5 pound sack. Here's my 10 pounds of work people want. Here's my 5 pound sack of IT budget. Now make it fit. And like most things, 10 pounds in a 5 pound sack, you start squeezing the sack and stuff oozes out all sides. That's called shadow IT. But so today, what you'd like to see is an IT partnership between the business and the CIO. So the CIO and the CIO's team. Again, the role you had for me. What was your role for me? Your role when you worked with Gina was to represent IT policies and procedures and how we do things and how we keep you safe and how it fits into our architecture and our budget, right? When you were in my office, you talked for her. Your job was to tell me why her shit was more important than everybody else's shit. And so you were then the translator between the business and IT. And to me, that's number one in how to run an IT shop. That is so rare. To me, in my experience, and I don't know what your experience has been, but it's so rare to see a shop that runs like that. They should have years ago. And I came out of Wall Street. So in Wall Street, the CIO reported to the CEO 40 years ago. 40 years ago. And board members, they had a tech committee, and investment banks had a tech committee in the 1980s on the board. And today, most of my clients, and I work in construction, logistics, manufacturing, legacy industries, IT reports to the CFO. And it's about, even if it's an enlightened CFO, it's about how do I make everything make perfect economic sense? And how do I keep the IT budget low? Because SG&A, we report SG&A and SG&A looks bad. You got to cut SG&A. So what's happened today is IT has been seen by enlightened companies as an engine of growth, as an engine of employee experience, an engine of customer experience. And the enlightened companies are saying to the CIO, you need to be a partner for me. If you go to my LinkedIn, you'll see, or my Twitter, my pinned tweet in Twitter is what I believe a CEO should expect from a CIO. I should be able to explain the financials like the CFO can. I should be able to go explain the products like the CMO or head of sales can, and even close a deal. I should be able to take a customer complaint and figure out how to get it solved. I should be able to represent the company to the media, to the investors. And that's what you should expect from a CIO. But very few CIOs can deliver. And most CEOs don't expect that because the CEO gets the CIO they settle for. That's good enough. Nothing's crashed. That's good enough. Budget's okay. That's good enough. Everybody's mad, but everybody's always mad at IT. So you wind up with an environment where instead of the CEO saying, this is a partner who can help me, they say, this is a person that just keeps the noise to a dull roar. But more and more, Dan, people are starting to realize that IT is in the product, it's in the service, it's in the customer experience, it's in how we run the business and make the decisions every day. So what's needed hasn't changed. What's changed is the nature of IT moving from SG&A to COGS. It's moved from selling general administrative overhead into cost of goods sold, the value we create for the customer. And since you're going for your MBA, if you go back and look at the marketing definitions, I think it's Kaplan on marketing said this years ago. We have the core product. What do we want? Why are we spending our money to buy something? Then we have the actual product. That's the thing you write the check for, the thing you put on the order form to create your desired outcome. And then you have the augmented product, which is how you do business with the company, how you find the product. So the traditional example, Peter Drucker's example, was nobody wants to buy a drill. Everybody wants to buy a hole.
Right.
The drill is the instrumentality of holes. If somebody could come up with a laser that made holes and they made them better, faster, cheaper, we'd stop buying drills, we'd start buying lasers.
Right.
So we got to understand, what does the customer want? What change do they want to create with this investment? And then what is the product we build to satisfy that? And now, more importantly, these days, it's how do I find the product? How do I research the product? What's my warranty? How do I get it replaced? We were kicking around, how would I build a new product, augmented product for drills? I was talking to an MBA class. So here's my augmented product for drills, Dan. If you're on a construction site and you're drilling hundreds and hundreds of holes, your drills get dull. If you ever did lots of drilling, you'll notice your drill gets dull. You have to sharpen the bit or get a new drill bit. So I would have a drill with a temperature sensor and a radio in it. And when the drill sensed that the drill was starting to get dull, I would send a message to Amazon. And then Amazon would fly a drone right to me in the construction site. And it would show up in front of me with a light on it going, hey, change your drill bit. And I would unscrew the drill bit and and put the new one in, and the thing would fly back to Amazon, resharpen my drill. That's an augmented product for drilling holes more effectively at industrial scale. So that's what IT should be thinking about today, not about how to make drills better and put them in the warehouse better.
So is it the case then, you're talking about a much harder job, a much more complicated job. Mm-hmm. So if you're somebody that's in IT and you are a technical expert, but you don't know anything about marketing and you don't know anything about the financials and you don't know anything about anything else, sounds like you are going to be diminishing as far as a leadership position would be considered in IT. Is that a function of cloud, or is that just a function of business?
I think it's a function of business, what we're trying to accomplish. Look, cloud has an element of it too, but I'm going to put an asterisk to that. People will tell you, well, you have cloud, so you don't need to be a technical expert anymore. Dan, I've been around since mainframes ruled the earth. And I got a degree in computer science and a master's degree in management of technology. And the stuff I learned in 1970 in the theory of computation, the underlying theory still works today when I'm looking at the cloud product. When in 1970, I started my undergraduate school, and somebody asked the professor in this, by the way, they taught in double E degree. There was no computer science degree because the assumption was we need more people building the circuitry than writing the programs, because AI was going to write all the programs by 1973, 74.
Sure.
So somebody asked the professor in this big lecture hall, so professor, what computer languages are we going to learn in this class or in this curriculum? The professor walked to the front of the desk, the front of the stage, and looked at this person in the audience and said, "This is not trade school. We are not here to teach you a language. We are here to teach you how languages work. We are here to teach you how to understand how languages are better. And you're going to learn, you will have to learn a bunch of stuff to do your homework, but that is not what we're teaching you. The stuff we're teaching you won't change. The language will. You won't learn an operating system. You'll learn all of them. You'll learn how they work and why to build them." And I learned that. That to me was a fantastic lesson, because here I was in my, nobody had computers. We had 3 computers in high schools in New York City. So I was one of this little elite learning everything I could, COBOL and Fortran and assembler and RPG and punch cards. And now this person was telling us all that stuff was meaningless. It's like, wow. I'm here to say that 40 years later, what I learned still applies. The theory of the theory of how a paging works and how virtual memory works and how you parse a language and the various completeness algorithms that we learned. It hasn't changed, even though the tools have changed and the problems have changed. The underlying principles of, I don't know, whether it's network latency versus bandwidth, whether it's locality of reference and how you pick memory, how do you tune an application if you're not sure what's wrong. Those things haven't changed. The names of the tools have changed, but the way we solve the problem hasn't. So what I'll say is, to say that cloud means you can get away with being less technical is incorrect. Because every time there's a generational shift, the assumption is, oh, it's becoming non-technical, you don't have to care. But if you don't understand where latency and bandwidth matter and you're head of IT, and you're talking now at the edge of the network, or you're talking about big data problems. Remember, when I went to school, big data was, I don't know, well, my first mainframe had 4K of RAM, 4 kilobytes of RAM. So big data was whatever didn't fit on 10 punch cards. And today it's in petabytes, right? What we called big data 20 years ago, we now just call data. Sure. But so as a CIO, if you can't understand what's going on in AI or VR and AR, or why this edge problem should be solved at the edge versus in the core of the cloud, you're going to be hurt. This Capital One breach, in Amazon, the person that used to work for Amazon dumped a bunch of stuff out of Cap One system, and everybody said, well, it's Amazon's fault and Amazon did something wrong. So this is a company with an IT security budget probably in excess of $100 million, and they didn't realize that certain parameters in Amazon are set a certain way, and you better turn that stuff off. Come on. Amazon did not create an attractive nuisance in the legal term by saying, hey, you can trip over this if it's some subtle thing. It's like, here's our manual. Don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. But if you're the CIO and you're not able to ask those questions, well, yeah, cloud is doing your security. But when I take my Active Directory off-prem and put it in the cloud, what does that mean to me? Or when I tell you my network is now not connecting to a data center, it's now connecting to 50 endpoints through an SD-WAN, and I've got a cloud access broker. The problem keeps getting more complicated. If the problem stayed the same, and you could just pick up all the infrastructure crap that you used to have to worry about and replace that with a black box and solve the same problem, yeah, you don't need all those infrastructure people. But I maintain that you still need infrastructure people. They just need to understand how Cloud A talks to Cloud B through Cloud Access Broker C, talking to Security Product D when people have this phone. The problem didn't get any more, or maybe even got a little more complicated. But it's certainly, you can't say the cloud absolves you from the technical decisions in architecture, in info security, in design, in user interface design. You still got to do all those things. But so as a CIO, the problem is you have to know all the technical stuff well enough to be bullshit proof. When somebody comes to you with a cloud access broker versus a security product, or I don't want to use VPN anymore, or what is zero trust, or what is homomorphic encryption. I'm going to do homomorphic encryption, and we're going to do calculations on completely encrypted stuff, and we're never going to decrypt it. And my first thought when I heard that was, what? And then I took a class at MIT, and I came away going, well, I don't have all the math, but at least somebody does, and I trust that they have the math. And so when you tell me that, I believe that it will work. And so I wouldn't have to worry about that because the math wasn't there 20 years ago. And the algorithm, the capability of operating on encrypted material, I need more processing power, wasn't there 20 years ago. So it was a problem I would never face. So what was true 40 years ago is true today. You can't stop learning the technology. But at the same time, now you can't stop learning the business. Okay.
So it's having enough experience with the technology to know how it works, and then being able to creatively apply it to the business problem, which that's rare. That's abstraction of problems, and that's rare to find people that can do that.
It's pattern to me. The skills that I look for are curiosity, pattern recognition, and abstraction. Those are the things that matter to me. When I met you, those were the things I was testing for when I talked to you. Because that's the key. I want to be able to say, okay, I'm seeing this problem in MX Energy. Hey, do you know MX Energy trading energy is a whole lot like mortgage trading? So what if we took some mortgage trading principles and applied it to the problem of trading energy? How could we use that better? That's what I want to see. And then I want to see people saying, it sounds like A, but your problem is really B.
Yeah, exactly.
I got hired by an armored car company, and they hired me because I was a bank guy. Our customers are all banks. We want a bank guy. We're going to be more like a bank. I was there 90 days, Dan, and I came to the executive management board and said, you hired the right guy, but not because I'm a bank guy. You are not a bank. You don't make money off interest. You carry material from point A to point B, and you make neat piles of money out of messy piles of money. That's called job shop manufacturing. And you're really a job shop manufacturer. You go collect bags of loose money. You put them in the same order. You throw out the bad ones as your work in progress. And then you get an order. Tuesday, 3 days from now, I need $80,000 in 20s loaded into a cassette model 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for a debolt machine and inserted into that machine at 3:05 p.m. That's job shop manufacturing. And in fact, when we went to Oracle and said, take us out of the banking vertical and put us in the manufacturing vertical, Oracle didn't know what to do. It's like, nobody's ever done that before. and my management, who were not manufacturing people, they were trucking people is what they thought they were. And I said, the trucking is the least important part of it. But I used to be a manufacturing engineer many years ago. When I was going to night school to get a computer science degree, I was making paper products. And it was just like making Easter baskets, only here we were making ATM cassettes full of money. And being able to see that stuff is a skill. Now, you get industries like energy and healthcare, and they have a big not invented here. I think the two industries I know of that are the most insular are healthcare and energy. Energy, if you didn't work for the guy down the street in the pipeline business or the extraction business, or if you're a midstream guy, we're upstream. You couldn't understand our problems. In healthcare, it's, you wouldn't understand how we bill a patient. You don't have a master's in public health or a PhD in virology. I lost out on a CIO job once for a hospital to a guy with a PhD in virology because he would understand more about how to run a hospital, IT, than I would, because I just know supply chain, hospitality, manufacturing, financial services, credit, collections, security, those things, but they're irrelevant. Virology was the key to running IT in a hospital.
Yeah.
He's now the fourth CIO, or I think they've had 4 CIOs since him, rather, in that hospital. but I see it all the time. I really see this, and so being able to say what I saw in industry A or company A now applies to industry B or company B is critical.
Okay. Well, there's a lot of talk right now about the way that IT budgeting has changed. It's moving from CapEx to OpEx. And a lot of talk about the changing skill set and the way that IT leaders need to be looking for certain aspects about people that they're hiring. So when we're talking about budget processes and you're talking about, a lot of IT CIOs report to CFOs, do you see the cloud making that better, making the IT budgeting process better, or is it the same problems just in a different area?
Well, again, like everything you asked me, the answer is going to be yes or no. So obviously, accounting for SaaS transactions, which is ASC 842 from the FAS. I don't know if you're familiar with ASC 842. It's accounting for lease trans. So there's actually a ruling about how do you treat SaaS software. A lot of companies were confused. I'm going to go buy a Microsoft product. I'm going to write a check for $1 million. I'm going to amortize it over 3 years, right? And now I'm going to buy the same product as a cloud license. So FFIEC, which is the industry group in financial services, had a ruling about 10 years ago, and it was codified by the Financial Accounting Standards Board as ASC 842, which said accounting for SaaS transactions, everything's OpEx these days. So you almost don't get into this CapEx, OpEx thing because for purposes of reporting, they wanted to normalize that. So if I invest $10 million in CapEx in IT and I invest the equivalent of $10 million in licensing, they're treated pretty much the same way from a P&L and cash flow perspective. Okay. So a lot of the discussion of CapEx and OpEx has changed. I don't remember, Ronnie Shields was the controller at MX. Well, Ronnie's the controller at one of my clients, and he and I spent hours on this because we were about to spend 20 something million bucks on SaaS. Matter of fact, if you want if you want a budgeting for SaaS discussion, call Ronnie and ask him to speak to your class. He's learned a hell of a lot about it. But so CapEx and OpEx, which used to be so important to us. I'm going to tell you another quick story. When I was at Oracle with the utility industry, when I worked for MX, Oracle had that, their database machine. Everything was going to be on the Sun hardware, and it was a package, and they would lease it to you. And so they came to the utility industry and said, we can see this engine, you're going to put it in your company. And these were big mainframe Oracle type shops. And they said, we're going to have this product, and it's all going to be paid for monthly. It's all leased. And everybody in the entire room went like that. No, can't do it. Because their rate base, how they charge for electricity or gas or water, was their capital cost with a value added to the top of it. Anything they paid for as OpEx didn't count in the rate base. Only CapEx counted in the rate base because of PUC accounting. And so they only wanted things they had to buy as capital assets. And so accepting distortions in accounting and tax treatment. If you go back many years ago, why did the computer leasing business start? Comdisco and companies like that. Because of a provision in the tax law called safe harbor leasing. If I bought stuff as a company and I wanted to get a tax write-off on it, I couldn't. But if I created an acquisition company whose business was acquiring and leasing assets, I could take a tax write-off on those assets. And then I could pass the savings back to my client. So if I wanted $100 million worth of computer equipment and I bought them myself, I lost out on the tax credit. If I paid Comdisco the equivalent amount, we got to split the tax credit, and the government paid us both. So that created the whole computer leasing industry. It's a tax anomaly that was exploited. And so eliminating distortions caused by junk like that, which they're horrible, but unless you can take advantage of them. From a pure perspective of IT budgeting, here's the problem with IT budgeting. Leverage. Leverage works both ways. So my IT budget, I don't know what it's like in your company, but in a lot of industrial companies in America, it's 0.8 to 2% of sales. So here's my IT budget. It's 1.1% of sales, let's say. Because that's, how do we know that? Because the CFO talked to other CFOs, and that's what they said. Here you go. And so here they give you your 2.2% or your 1.1% of budget. And now I'm going to be a CIO. My CFO says, I need a budget cut from you. And I'm going to save 5% of the IT budget. That's a pretty big number. If somebody came to you and said, cut 5% of your budget, you'd be going, hell, what do I do? So now we're going to cut 5% of a 1.1% of sales budget. 0.055% of sales. Yippee-ki-yay. We spend more than that when we had offices on Starbucks. So what did I accomplish other than feel good as a CIO? What typically happens, this 10-pound and a 5-pound sack problem happens. The business is out there doing shadow IT. They're writing Excel spreadsheets. Yeah. Today, what they're doing is they're hiring Salesforce.com and Zoho and Zoom and everybody else. And before you know it, because the business needs the technology, having the CFO just turn the spigot does not change that. So the IT budget process should be like this. And tell you how it worked at MX Energy. I didn't bring Jeff Mayer IT budget items unless I wanted them for my own department. I wanted a new monitoring tool for ASCAR. Pradeep wanted a new development tool. Okay. It was the Ginas that came with the budget. It was the Julianas that came with the budget. I need X to do my job, and then I would go with them. And I would be justifying the architecture. Yes, this is the right way to do it. And yes, this is what it will cost. I promised to build the thing Juliana or whoever needed for the money we've agreed because we worked on it ahead of time. But the business need is not me coming. It's the business coming and saying they need it. And it's much harder for the CEO to turn down the business head. And by the way, they also get to bear the cost of what the project looks like. So I'm going to spend $1 million on a new forecasting system. And in return, I'm going to improve the margin on buying commodity by 2%. And we're going to bake that 2% into that guy's budget. Or in the marketing budget, in Gina's budget, Gina's going to raise sales X. So Gina gets tagged with that much sales raise. And that's what should be in the budget. The business should step up and say, this technology accomplishing this job, which Dan or Wayne or whoever says is the right way to do it, will accomplish this result. And so that's the way IT should be budgeted. It's rarely budgeted that way unless it's a strategic project for the CEO. The whole steering committee mindset is a way to tell people no. And Dan, back in the day when a mainframe was the only game in town, if you told somebody no IT, they were pretty much locked out of IT. There were no magazines at the time called Popular Mainframes. But when I can buy a PC or a mini computer or now a cloud service with a credit card, the IT work doesn't stop. It just moves into nefarious places. It now becomes Excel spreadsheets that are used to close the books. It now becomes SOX violations left, right, and center, or HIPAA violations in healthcare left, right, and center. And so we're losing this connection between business value, which comes not from IT, but from the business side, and then what it costs to deliver it. If I'm a business and I want to buy a new chemical plant, there's not the chemical plant department that comes and presents to the board. There's the business of making that chemical that comes to the board. And then they say, and we hired construction company A, B, and C, and our own engineers are going to run it for us. But in IT, we turn the whole thing around. Traditionally, the CIO would present. Before I went to work for MX, I worked for a bank 25 years ago. And I'll never forget standing in front of the board of directors arguing for a new system, while the people who needed the system, the guys running the businesses, were sitting in the audience watching me present their systems. And when the board was needling me and grilling me, it was a really rude board. It was a whole bunch of self-made millionaires from Wall Street. And they were merciless. And I was this young CIO, and they were killing me. And the people in the audience who were like laughing at each other, laughing and whispering to each other and laughing, they knew the answers to the questions I couldn't answer. And after that performance, I went to the CEO and said, I'm never doing that again, Barry. I am never standing up in front of the board presenting business projects again. From now on, the business people are going to present, and I'll sit next to them and answer technical questions.
So I think you've already answered this question. And so you're talking, I'm thinking, why do we keep hiring the wrong people? It sounds like you're making a strong case that there's a just endemic problem in business to where business keeps hiring the wrong IT people, or the business is hiring the wrong business people. And it's
not hiring the right business people. It's a generation. Look, I can say this because I have the gray hair. It's a generational problem. The business leaders in the traditional businesses who came up in the 1980s don't have an appreciation for how systems of engagement and systems of insight are different from systems of record. And they're having trouble getting their head around that. And it starts with the board. Look, I think you've heard me say, and you've certainly read my writing, I'm a believer in what Russell Reynolds coined, the qualified technology expert, the QTE. Yes. Yeah. And to put that into your B school context, when Enron and WorldCom had their debacles, which were failures of governance, right? These were off-balance sheet problems. The government realized that people could be on a board of directors and they couldn't read a financial statement. Now, I was young and I was shocked. What do you mean? You're on the board of directors and you can't read a financial statement. But it turned out that they were cohorts and friends and cronies, and the complexity of accounting was growing. And so in 2001, 2002, Sarbanes-Oxley came out and mandated the QFE. Every board of a publicly traded company in the United States must have a qualified financial expert on the audit committee. Now, I refer to that as the Full Employment Act for retired Big Four partners, because those were the only people everybody knew were both, qualified enough and didn't work for a competitor. So they all got hired and became the QFEs and became audit committee chair. So fast forward to 2016, Russell Reynolds said in an article that is absolutely required reading for everybody on board, the rise of the qualified technology expert in the boardroom. And they argued that we need not digital directors. I want to make a careful distinction. A digital director used to work for Disney and can show you how to build content. A QTE was somebody that had run a disaster plan and capacity management and understood change management and cybersecurity and what it takes to not blow up an ERP project. They were the hands-on people who ran IT. And so I believe it starts at the board. The board needs to have somebody who can ask the right questions and understand the answers. Solar Winds, the intern, see the latest? An intern is the one who changed the password. The president of the former president of the company, CEO of the company, said we're blaming it on an intern. And my counter to that was, what kind of change management process would allow an intern to create an easily guessed password and then apply it across the whole production system? And there were no checks and balances in the process. So if somebody on the board had heard that, there was a healthcare company, Anthem, that got hacked. And they announced in the Wall Street Journal after they were hacked that they didn't encrypt any of their patient data because it would be too difficult for the employees and systems to get to that. And by the way, they had the CIO interviewed in the Wall Street Journal, and the CIO said, and by the way, encryption is not required by HIPAA. And so I went and looked up HIPAA, and it doesn't say that. It says you just have to have protection as good as encryption, compensating controls. So in truth, it wasn't required. But if I was on the board of directors and somebody said, we're not going to encrypt any of our data because it's inconvenient and we don't have to, somebody on the board should have said, are you out of your goddamn mind? Now, it turned out the bottom line answer, Dan, was their disk drives were so old, they didn't support hardware encryption. And the overhead of software encryption for petabytes of data would have sunk them. So this was a technical debt problem masquerading as it's no problem because the CIO didn't have the nerve to go and ask for the money he or she should have. So anyway, long story short, the IT budgeting, the reason CEOs get the CIO they settle for is most CEOs have never seen a real CIO. They've never seen a business partner. That's why I put that tweet out there that said, these are the things a CIO ought to be able to do.
Yeah.
Because to say that a CIO should be the head geek is wrong. Again, one more quick story about MX Energy. So here I am, the new CIO of MX Energy. My first week on the job was a board meeting. So they invite me to the board dinner. And I'm hobnobbing with all these directors. I don't know them. They don't know me. We're having dinner, a very nice dinner in a very nice restaurant. And we talked for a couple of hours. And then one of the directors in the group I was in said to me, so what do you do for the company? And I said, oh, I'm the new CIO. And the person looked at me and said, I never would have guessed. That was a crowning achievement of my profession of 20 years as a CIO.
Here, I understand.
And that's the key, is that CEOs need to understand what they should expect and set their expectations high enough. Because CEOs think they need to know more tech than they should need to know, because the CIO is there to protect them, anymore than they don't have to be international tax experts. That's why they have a CFO. But there's no stigma in not being an expert in international tax. There appears to be not knowing enough about IT. And so we've got to get the stigma off the CEO and get some knowledge on the board who can counsel them, and then make the right choices of CIOs. And so not pick the CIO that just doesn't get you in trouble and is able to get away with answering everything in geek speak, or say, oh, you wouldn't understand, it's technical, just here, sign here.
Right. Okay, that's interesting. You're actually coming at it from the other side. I would have thought that the stigma would have worked the other way. And you're saying that there's the stigma is on the CEO for not knowing enough about tech.
It's the stigma's on the CEO for not putting the right requirement on the CIO. Dan, I do this for a living. I advise CEOs and boards. And the number one comment that I hear that stops me in my tracks, I've probably lost some deals from this, is I got to ask you a dumb question about technology. And I literally stop the conversation and say, I'm sorry, you can't say that in front of me. Well, what do you mean? Number one, you're the CEO or the board director. No question you ask is dumb. Bless you. Number two, you're paying me by the hour, so no question you ask is dumb. But the joke about that is, if the CIO cannot explain in business terms what they're trying to have you do or the risk, get a different CIO. I say this all the time. I piss off CIOs reliably. If your CIO cannot explain the problem as a business problem, you have the wrong person. But for so many years, the assumption in business has been IT is so technical and geeky and weird that anybody that's that geeky and weird will never understand business. How could they possibly? Again, you don't say to your CFO, well, I understand you have a CPA, therefore you can't talk to marketing. Everybody'd laugh you out of the room. But we in IT get away with perpetuating the myth that what we do is so weird and so different and so non-business-like that we can't be business people. And I spend a lot of my time in writing and speaking to try to put the onus on the CEO to insist that their CIO be a business person first and a partner first. And a technician, they have to be, you can't be not a technician. Dan, 20-something years ago, there was a trend to put business people in as CIOs. I took a class at Harvard University in 1997 called Delivering Information Services. It was 2 weeks on the Harvard Business School campus with some of the leading minds in IT thinking. And it was a terrific, I wanted to go to this class for years. About half the student body of about 40 people were professional CIOs, people like me who came up through IT. The other half, and they were easy to tell because they walked around the whole time like deer in the headlights. They were people who had been like the head of marketing, or they ran a chemical plant, or they were somebody who ran accounting. And now we anoint you CIO. We dub you, sir, CIO. And they had 3 weeks at Harvard to go figure out what a CIO did. And my mistake was not quitting my job and hanging out my shingle to just sell services to all these people because they were so clueless. And but the assumption was IT was so terrible that having a person that just understood the business we were in and could talk to business people and not insult them and piss them off and belittle them would be more effective. And in fact, these people were just petrified of screwing up. And many of them did screw up, and the pendulum swung away from that. Yeah. It went from everybody's a geek to everybody should be a business person and the geeks will take care of themselves. And then people made stupid decisions left and right. And now it should be, it's not an or, it's an and. Simple as that. The CIO should be a business executive who happens to have a technical specialty.
Nice. Well, Wayne, I appreciate the time and the perspective, my friend.
Sure.
If I wanted to schedule a follow-up, could we do something like that?
Absolutely. You can see I like talking about this.
Yeah, no kidding. Is this something that I could put onto my YouTube channel?
I don't think I said anything and named any companies that are still in business that yeah, I absolutely put it on your YouTube channel, put it wherever you want. Just let me know and I'll boost it on social media.
Fantastic. All right, my friend. Well, I appreciate it. And I will keep you apprised as things develop on the side for the MBA.
That's terrific. And I'm going to put in my my plug. You know, I do this for a living. So if you know anybody that likes this kind of discussion and wants somebody to help them with their IT, either as a CIO or as a consultant, give them my name.
Well, I'm going to totally tell Maria. She's going to want to watch this. Really interesting.
Well, you know, Maria and even you know, I say a lot of the same stuff, just in different order in my Cloud Wars presentations. I've got about 24 of them in the can now. And once a month, I do this Cloud Wars thing. And even if you don't want to watch it for me, because you know me, the other people that Bob Evans has speaking are really good at different areas, customer stuff, manufacturing stuff, marketing stuff. So they're really worth watching once a month.
Okay, will do. All right, Wayne.
All right, Dan.
Thank you very much.
Sure. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.